Doorman insults Tyler Perry at hotel. Didn't imagine the consequences. Marcus Johnson's reflection stared back at him from the polished brass doorframe of the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and his usually crisp uniform looked slightly wrinkled, something that would have bothered him on any other day. But today, after 48 hours with barely any sleep, he could hardly bring himself to care. "You look like hell, man," Devin, the morning doorman, said as he gathered his things from the small staff room behind the lobby. "You sure you can handle another double?" Marcus forced a smile. "Got no choice, brother. Mama's treatment ain't gonna pay for itself." Devin shook his head, pulling on his jacket. "You can't keep this up forever. When's the last time you actually slept?" "I catch a few hours on the bus," Marcus replied, straightening his tie in the mirror. It wasn't exactly a lie. He did doze off sometimes during the 3-hour commute. Gas prices being what they were, driving wasn't an option anymore. "That ain't sleep, that's passing out. You were gonna make yourself sick." Marcus turned to face his coworker. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but unless you got $40,000 lying around to cover Mama's bills, this is what I got to do." Devin raised his hands in surrender. "I hear you, just be careful, all right? Rich folks don't like it when we're anything less than perfect." As if to emphasize his point, Mrs. Henderson, a regular guest known for her complaints, swept through the lobby. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor like tiny hammers. "Marcus?" she called out, her voice sharp as a razor. "My car's been waiting for 3 minutes." "Right away, Mrs. Henderson." Marcus hurried to his post, forcing energy into his steps that he didn't feel. The morning sun hit his eyes like needles as he stepped outside. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of open doors, hailed taxis, and carried luggage. Each movement felt mechanical, rehearsed from 15 years of practice. His mother's voice from their last conversation kept echoing in his head. "Baby, you don't need to work so hard for me," she'd said, her voice weak from the latest round of chemo. "The Lord will provide." "The Lord helps those who help themselves, Mama," he'd replied, tucking her blanket tighter around her thin shoulders. "You just focus on getting better." A commotion by the valet station snapped Marcus back to the present. 2 guests were arguing over a scraped bumper, their voices rising above the usual hotel ambiance. "Sir, ma'am, please," Marcus intervened, stepping between them. "Let me get our valet manager to assist you." The male guest, red-faced and aggressive, jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "You people need to train your staff better." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the familiar coded language, but kept his voice steady. "I understand your frustration, sir. If you'll just step inside." It took 20 minutes to diffuse the situation, and by the time Marcus returned to his post, his head was pounding. He checked his phone. A text from his sister. "Mama's fever up again. Nurse says it's normal after chemo, but thought you should know." Marcus closed his eyes, letting his head rest against the cool marble pillar for just a moment. The weight of everything, the bills, the exhaustion, his mother's suffering, pressed down on him like a physical force. "Johnson, Mr. Phillips, the day manager, called from the lobby. Stand up straight, we have VIPs coming." Marcus snapped to attention, shoving his phone back in his pocket. The afternoon sun had started its descent, casting long shadows across the entrance. A group of businessmen in expensive suits filed past, barely acknowledging his existence as he held the door. "Evening, gentlemen," he said automatically, the words hollow in his mouth. His mind wandered to the stack of medical bills on his kitchen table. The latest one had arrived yesterday, $12,467, for just 1 round of treatment. Even with insurance, his portion was more than 2 months' salary. He'd already maxed out 3 credit cards and taken a loan against his 401k. "You good, Marcus?" James, one of the bellhops, asked as he wheeled a loaded luggage cart past. "Yeah, just tired." Marcus rubbed his eyes. "You know how it is." James nodded sympathetically. "How's your mama doing?" "Fighting." "You know how she is. Tough as nails, even on her worst days." "That's where you get it from," James said with a small smile. "Hey, you heard about that new position opening up at corporate? Better hours, better pay. You should apply." Marcus shook his head. "Can't risk it right now. Need the guaranteed income, even if it's less. Besides, Who's gonna hire a 50-year-old doorman for a corporate job? Man, you got more experience dealing with rich folks than half those suits upstairs. Plus, you got that business degree. From 20 years ago, Marcus interrupted. Look, I appreciate it, but… He was cut off by the arrival of a large tour group, all rolling suitcases and excited chatter. For the next hour, Marcus fell into the familiar rhythm of doors and greetings, his movements growing more mechanical with each passing minute. The sun had fully set when his phone buzzed again. This time it was the hospital billing department. Marcus let it go to voicemail. He couldn't deal with that right now. His feet ached, and the edges of his vision had started to blur. Just 6 more hours, he muttered to himself. You can do 6 more hours. A young couple approached the entrance, the woman wearing a sparkly dress that caught the light from the hotel's facade. Marcus recognized them, newlyweds staying in one of the suites. Evening, Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, he greeted, managing a warm smile despite his exhaustion. Enjoying your stay? The woman beamed. Oh yes, everyone's been so wonderful. Especially you. Thank you for helping with our bags yesterday. Her genuine warmth made Marcus stand a little straighter. This was why he'd stayed in this job so long, these small moments of human connection, of being seen as a person rather than just a uniform. My pleasure, ma'am. You folks have a good evening. As they passed through the doors, Marcus caught fragments of their conversation about dinner reservations and Broadway shows. A lifetime ago, he'd dreamed of taking his mother to New York, showing her the city she'd always wanted to see. Now, those dreams felt like toys left in an attic, dusty and forgotten. The night wore on. Marcus's world narrowed to the 10 feet around his post, his responses becoming more automated with each passing hour. The lack of sleep was really starting to hit him now, making the lights seem too bright and the sounds too sharp. Just a few more hours, he kept telling himself. Then you can rest. But rest wasn't really an option. He had to be at the hospital early tomorrow for his mother's appointment, then back here for another shift. The numbers in his bank account kept flashing through his mind like warning lights. A group of drunk wedding guests stumbled out, loud and unsteady. Marcus helped them into their waiting Ubers, making sure each one got safely into the right car. One of them tried to tip him with a crumpled dollar bill. Keep it, Marcus said gently. Get home safe. Around midnight, the flow of guests slowed to a trickle. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, fighting to keep his eyes open. The city sounds seemed distant, like they were coming through water. His phone buzzed again, his sister. Mama's asking for you. Says she knows you are working but wanted you to know she's praying for you. Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He quickly wiped them away as a black SUV pulled up to the entrance. The vehicle was nice but not flashy, the kind that real money often preferred. Through his fatigue, Marcus barely registered that the security detail seemed familiar. The back door opened, and a man in casual clothes stepped out. In Marcus's exhausted state, all he saw was the hoodie and jeans, so different from the usual formal attire of their guests. Without thinking, without really looking, he held up his hand. Service entrance is around back, he said sharply, the words leaving his mouth before his brain could catch up. The man stopped. The air seemed to freeze. Excuse me? Something in that voice cut through Marcus's fog. He looked up properly for the first time, and his heart stopped. Tyler Perry stood before him, his expression a mixture of shock and something else, something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Security personnel emerged from the SUV, their hands instinctively moving toward their jackets, but Perry waved them off. The gesture was calm, controlled, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. Do you know who I am? Perry asked, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of thunder. Marcus felt his knees go weak. The exhaustion of the past 48 hours crashed into him like a wave, along with the crushing realization of what he'd just done. Mr. Perry, I am so sorry. I wasn't. That's not what I asked you, Perry interrupted. His tone remained measured, but there was steel beneath it. I asked if you know who I am. Yes, sir, Marcus managed to say, his mouth dry. Yes, I know exactly who you are. I wasn't thinking clearly. I've been working doubles, and my mama. He caught himself, realizing he was rambling. Here's no excuse, sir. I'm deeply sorry. Perry studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. By now, a small crowd had gathered in the lobby, faces pressed against the glass doors. Someone had their phone out, recording. "Your name?" Perry asked. "Marcus Johnson, sir." Perry nodded slowly. "Well, Mr. Johnson, I'm going to need to speak with your manager. Now." Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for his radio. "Mr. Phillips," he said into it, his voice shaking. "Could you please come to the front entrance? It's urgent." As they waited in tense silence, Marcus could feel his world crumbling around him. 15 years of service, of dignity, of doing everything right, all undone in a moment of exhausted carelessness. He thought of his mother in her hospital bed, of the bills piling up, of the promises he'd made to take care of everything. "Lord," he whispered under his breath, "what have I done?" Mr. Phillips burst through the doors moments later, already apologizing profusely. As the manager led Tyler Perry inside, Marcus remained at his post, his uniform feeling suddenly too tight, too heavy. Through the glass, he could see phones being raised, pictures being taken, social media posts being typed. In less than an hour, he knew, the world would know about his mistake. And there would be no coming back from it. Marcus sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at his phone as it buzzed relentlessly. The video had gone viral, 3 million views and counting. His sister had called 17 times, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. The comments scrolled past like a twisted kaleidoscope of judgment. "Uncle Tom Doorman tells Tyler Perry to use the back entrance. This what happens when you forget where you came from. Number sellout. Ritz-Carlton showing their true colors." His neighbor, Mrs. Washington, knocked on his door for the 3rd time that morning. "Marcus, baby, you need to eat something. I made your favorite cornbread." "Thank you, Mrs. Washington," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Just leave it by the door." He heard her sigh through the thin walls. "You can't hide in there forever, sugar. This too shall pass." But Marcus knew better. In the digital age, nothing ever really passed. It just kept circulating, kept haunting you. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from James, the bellhop. "Man, they're going crazy on Twitter. Number Ritz racism is trending. You okay?" Marcus didn't respond. How could he explain that this wasn't about racism? That he'd been so bone-tired, so desperate, he hadn't even registered who he was talking to. The morning's termination meeting played on repeat in his mind. "I am sorry, Marcus, Mr." Phillips had said, not meeting his eyes. But given the circumstances, the social media response, the company's reputation, 15 years, Marcus had whispered. 15 years of perfect service. "And we appreciate that. We'll provide a reference." "A reference?" Marcus had laughed, the sound hollow. "Who's gonna hire me now? My face is all over the internet." Phillips had shifted uncomfortably. "The severance package is generous. 3 months' pay, plus—" "My mama's insurance," Marcus had interrupted. "When does it end?" "End of the month. I am truly sorry, Marcus, if it were up to me." But it was never up to people like Phillips. It was up to the faceless executives who'd never worked a service job in their lives, who'd never had to choose between paying rent or buying medicine. Now, sitting in his apartment with Mrs. Washington's cornbread getting cold outside his door, Marcus opened his banking app. The numbers stared back at him, cold and unforgiving. Even with the severance package, he had maybe 2 months before everything fell apart. His phone rang again. This time, it was the hospital. "Mr. Johnson," the billing department representative said, her voice professionally detached. "We're calling about your mother's upcoming treatment schedule. Our records show a change in your insurance status." Marcus closed his eyes. Can I call you back? I need to figure some things out." "Of course, but please be advised that we need confirmation of payment arrangements within 48 hours to maintain the current treatment schedule." After hanging up, Marcus finally forced himself to open his social media. The notifications were overwhelming, messages from people he hadn't talked to in years, all wanting to know his side of the story. A text from his sister popped up. "Mama's asking about you. She saw something on the news. You need to come explain before she gets upset." Marcus felt his chest tighten. His mother. How could he face her? How could he explain that her son, who she'd raised to be proud and dignified, had become a viral symbol of internalized racism? The buzzer for his apartment rang. Marcus ignored it. Marcus Johnson. A familiar voice called through the intercom. Boy, if you don't open this door right now, I am calling the super to let me in. This is Aunt Ruby, and you know I'll do it. Marcus groaned. Aunt Ruby wasn't really his aunt, but she'd been his mother's best friend for 30 years. She was also the most persistent woman he'd ever met. Reluctantly, he buzzed her in. Minutes later, she burst through his door like a hurricane in a floral dress. Look at you, she said, taking in his rumpled appearance. Sitting here in the dark like some kind of hermit. Have you even eaten? Aunt Ruby, I am not in the mood. Did I ask if you were in the mood? She moved around his apartment, opening curtains and picking up scattered clothes. Your mama raised you better than this. Sitting here feeling sorry for yourself while she's worried sick. You don't understand, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I messed up. Bad. And now. Aunt Ruby sat down beside him, her expression softening. Baby, you think I don't know about messing up? You think any of us get through this life without making mistakes? This is different. People are calling me, saying I am. He couldn't finish the sentence. A sellout? An Uncle Tom? Aunt Ruby shook her head. Let me tell you something about people, especially those keyboard warriors. They don't know you. They don't know about the nights you spent sleeping in that hospital chair next to your mama. They don't know about the time you gave your last $50 to that homeless family outside the hotel. Tears started rolling down Marcus's cheeks. None of that matters now. All they see is that video. All they see is a black man telling Tyler Perry to use the back door. Then tell them why, Aunt Ruby said firmly. Tell them about working doubles until you couldn't see straight. Tell them about choosing between gas money and medicine. Nobody wants to hear that, Marcus whispered. They've already made up their minds. His phone buzzed again, another news outlet requesting an interview. The story had gone national. Your mama needs her son, Aunt Ruby said softly. She doesn't care about no viral video or what people are saying. She needs to hear from you that you are okay. Marcus wiped his eyes. How can I face her? Everything I've done, all the extra shifts, all the sacrifices, it was to take care of her. And now I can't even do that. You listen to me, Marcus Johnson, Aunt Ruby said, taking his face in her hands. Your mama didn't raise no quitter. We're family, and family finds a way. Now go take a shower. You smell like 3-day-old worry, and then we're going to the hospital. As Marcus stood under the hot water, his phone kept buzzing in the other room. News alerts, messages, comments. The digital world wouldn't stop spinning just because his real one had fallen apart. He thought about his mama, about how she'd raised him alone after his father died, working 2 jobs and never complaining. How she'd put him through community college, believing in his dreams even when he'd stopped believing in them himself. The water ran cold, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was on the upcoming hospital bills, on the treatments his mother couldn't miss, on the impossible choices he'd have to make. When he emerged from the bathroom, Aunt Ruby had cleaned his apartment and laid out fresh clothes. I talked to Pastor Williams, she said as he dressed. The church is taking up a collection. No, Marcus interrupted firmly. I can't. I can't take charity. It's not charity, it's community. The same community you've been helping all these years. Remember when Sister Jenkins needed money for her son's funeral? You were the first one to donate, even though you were barely making ends meet yourself. Marcus sat heavily on his bed. This is different. How? Because it's you needing help instead of giving it? Aunt Ruby crossed her arms. Pride is a sin, baby, and right now it's keeping you from letting people love you the way you've loved them. A notification popped up on his phone. Someone had posted an old photo of him helping an elderly guest during a snowstorm, carrying her bags while shielding her with an umbrella. The caption read, "This is the same Doorman y'all are dragging. Sometimes there's more to the story." Aunt Ruby nodded at the phone. See? Truth always finds its way out. But before Marcus could respond, another notification appeared. Someone had dug up his employment records, posting his salary and suggesting he'd been bought and paid for by the white establishment. The walls seemed to close in again. I can't do this, Aunt Ruby. I can't face everybody knowing what they think of me. Then don't face everybody, she said simply. Just face your mama. She's the only one who matters right now. Marcus looked around his apartment, at the stack of medical bills on the table, at the family photos on the wall, at the uniform he'd worn with pride for 15 years, now hanging limply in the closet. "What am I going to tell her?" he asked quietly. "The truth," Aunt Ruby replied, "that her son made a mistake because he was exhausted from trying to take care of her, that he's human just like everybody else, and that he's not going to let this break him." Marcus's phone buzzed one more time. It was a text from James. "Hey man, Tyler Perry's team was asking questions about you today. Wanted to know about your situation, your mama's health. Something's up." Marcus showed the text to Aunt Ruby, who raised an eyebrow. "Well, well," she said, "maybe this story ain't over yet." "What do you mean?" "I mean, baby, that sometimes God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes what looks like your lowest moment is just the beginning of your testimony." She stood up, extending her hand. "Now come on, your mama's waiting." As they left the apartment, Marcus could hear Mrs. Washington's television through her door, another news channel discussing the incident. His face would be everywhere for weeks, maybe months. His name would be a cautionary tale in diversity training sessions. But maybe, just maybe, Aunt Ruby was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of his story. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped inside, heading toward whatever came next. The weight of his mistake still pressed down on him, but for the first time since it happened, he allowed himself to hope. After all, he was his mother's son, and she hadn't raised him to give up, no matter how far he fell. The hospital hallway seemed longer than usual. Each step felt heavy as Marcus and Aunt Ruby approached his mother's room. Through the window, he could see her lying in bed, looking smaller than he remembered. "Baby boy," his mother called out weakly as he entered. Her eyes were tired but still sharp. "Come here and tell me what's going on. These nurses won't tell me anything, but I keep seeing your face on the television." Marcus sat beside her bed, taking her thin hand in his. "Mama, I messed up." "How bad?" "Bad enough to lose my job." She squeezed his hand. "Tell me everything." As Marcus recounted the incident, his mother's expression remained unchanged. When he finished, silence filled the room. 48 hours without sleep?" she finally said, her voice stern despite her weakness. "Working yourself half to death?" "I had to, Mama. These treatments are not worth my son destroying himself," she interrupted. "I raised you better than that." "But Mama?" "No buts. The Lord provides, Marcus. He always has, always will." She touched his cheek. "You are carrying too much on your shoulders, baby. Been carrying it too long." Marcus felt tears forming again. "The insurance runs out at the end of the month. I don't know what we're going to do." "We'll do what we've always done," his mother said firmly. "We'll pray, we'll trust, and we'll keep moving forward." His phone buzzed, another news alert. Someone had posted an old video of him helping a disabled veteran into the hotel during a rainstorm. "See," his mother said, nodding at the phone. "The truth comes out, bit by bit. God don't let no lie live forever." But even as she spoke, Marcus's mind was racing with calculations. The severance wouldn't cover even one round of treatment. His credit was maxed out. The church collection would help, but it wouldn't be enough. "I should have recognized him, Mama. Should have been more alert." "You are human, baby. Humans make mistakes." She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly. "Now tell me the truth. When's the last time you really slept?" Before Marcus could answer, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Johnson, there's someone here to see you. Says they're from Tyler Perry Studios." Marcus felt his heart stop. Aunt Ruby squeezed his shoulder. "Remember what I said," she whispered. "Sometimes what looks like the end is just the beginning." Marcus stood on shaky legs. Whatever was coming next, he would face it with dignity, for his mama, for himself, and for all the years he'd spent holding that door with pride. Tyler Perry sat in his hotel suite, staring at his iPad. The incident with the doorman had blown up far beyond what he'd expected. His social media team had been monitoring the situation, and the public reaction was intense. "Sir," his assistant Sarah said, placing a folder on his desk, "I have the information you requested about Marcus Johnson." Tyler nodded, not looking up from the latest viral post about the incident. "Tell me." "It's different than what we expected." Sarah opened the folder. "Marcus Johnson, age 50. 15 years at the Ritz-Carlton, perfect service record until yesterday. But that's not the interesting part. Now Tyler looked up. Go on. His mother, Rose Johnson, age 75, stage 4 breast cancer. She's been receiving treatment at Grady Memorial for the past 8 months. Sarah paused. Mr. Johnson has been working double shifts to cover the medical bills. According to his co-workers, he often works 36 hours straight. Tyler leaned back in his chair, memories flooding back. His own mother, Maxine, fighting cancer. The endless hospital visits, the mounting bills. The night of the incident, Sarah continued, he was on hour 48 of a double-double shift. His supervisor tried to send him home, but he refused, said he needed the overtime. Where does he live? Small studio apartment in South Atlanta. 3-hour bus ride to work. He sold his car to help pay for his mother's first round of treatment. Tyler stood up, walking to the window. The Atlanta skyline sparkled in the distance, but his mind was elsewhere. Get me his mother's doctor on the phone. Already did, sir. Sarah checked her notes. Dr. Patterson says Mrs. Johnson's responding well to treatment, but they're concerned about continuing care. Mr. Johnson's insurance ends at the end of the month due to his termination. And without the treatment? Sarah's voice softened. 6 months, maybe less. Tyler closed his eyes, remembering his own mother's battle. The nights he'd worked 4 jobs, sleeping in his car between shifts. The prayer that had kept him going, God, just let me make enough to keep her alive one more day. The media's running with the racism angle, Sarah added, but his co-workers paint a different picture. The bellhop, James Turner, said Marcus once gave his entire Christmas bonus to a homeless family staying at the hotel during a snowstorm. Paid for their room for a week. Tyler turned from the window. Where is he now? At the hospital with his mother. Our team has been monitoring social media. It's getting ugly. Death threats, people calling him names. For a mistake made after 48 hours without sleep, Tyler murmured, while working himself to death to keep his mama alive. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the hateful comments. The same people who praised him for his success were crucifying this man for a single moment of exhausted confusion. Get the car ready, Tyler said suddenly, and call my lawyers. Sir? Also, get me everything on Mrs. Johnson's treatment plan. Cost projections, recommended care, everything. Sarah nodded, already typing on her phone. What are you thinking? Tyler stared at a photo of Marcus Johnson from Better Days, standing proud in his doorman's uniform, helping an elderly guest. I am thinking about my mama, Sarah. And about how sometimes God puts us in places for reasons we don't understand until later. The press is still camped outside, Sarah warned. If you go to the hospital... Let them see, Tyler interrupted. Let them see what really happened here. Not the 10-second video they've been sharing, but the whole truth. He picked up his jacket. And Sarah? Call the Ritz. Tell them I want to discuss Marcus Johnson's termination. Specifically, I want to know who made that decision without consulting me first. You are going to help him, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Tyler thought about his mother's last days, how she'd made him promise to help others when he could. My mama used to say, God didn't bring you out to leave others behind. He looked once more at the photo of Marcus. This man didn't hate me, Sarah. He didn't even see me. He saw another long shift, another step toward keeping his mama alive. And instead of understanding, we crucified him for it. The elevator descended to the lobby, where reporters waited with cameras ready. But Tyler's mind was already at the hospital, already thinking about the conversation to come. Sometimes, he realized, what looked like a moment of darkness was just God's way of leading you to where you needed to be. The car pulled up, and Tyler stepped out into the flashing cameras. But for once, he didn't care about the media circus. Somewhere in this city, a man sat by his mother's hospital bed, thinking his world had ended. Tyler Perry was about to show him it had only just begun. A text from Sarah lit up his phone. Mrs. Johnson's next treatment is scheduled for Monday. Without insurance, it's $42,000. Tyler replied with 2 words, handle it. Then he turned to his driver. Grady Memorial Hospital. And hurry. We've got a family to help. As the car pulled away from the curb, Tyler thought about perception versus reality. How quick people were to judge, to assume, to condemn. He thought about his own journey, the times he'd been misunderstood, underestimated, dismissed. Sometimes, his mother had told him once, God uses our lowest moments to lift us higher than we ever imagined. Looking at the hospital bills and the folder on his lap, Tyler smiled. Marcus Johnson didn't know it yet, but his story was about to change. And Tyler Perry was going to make sure the whole world watched it happen. The hospital corridor buzzed with nervous energy as Tyler approached Mrs. Johnson's room. Security had cleared the floor, but whispers still echoed from every corner. Nurses tried to look busy while stealing glances. Someone gasped, "Is that really him?" Outside the room, Tyler paused. Through the window, he could see Marcus holding his mother's hand, his head bowed. The sight transported Tyler back 20 years to another hospital room, another son desperately trying to save his mother. Sarah touched his arm. "The press is gathering downstairs. Should we?" "Let them wait," Tyler said softly. "This moment isn't for them." He knocked gently on the door. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes widening with recognition and fear, but it was Mrs. Johnson who spoke first. "Lord have mercy," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Tyler Perry, in my hospital room. I must look a mess." "You look beautiful, ma'am," Tyler replied, stepping inside. "Just like my mama did when she was fighting the same fight." The tension in the room shifted slightly. Marcus stood, his hands shaking. "Mr. Perry, I—" "Sit down, Marcus," Tyler said gently. "We need to talk, all of us." Aunt Ruby, who had been quiet in the corner, straightened her dress. "Should I leave?" "No," Tyler said, pulling up a chair. "Family should stay. And from what I hear, you are definitely family." He opened the folder in his lap, looking directly at Mrs. Johnson. "Your next treatment is scheduled for Monday." "We're still figuring that out," Marcus started, but Tyler held up his hand. "It's taken care of. That one and all the ones after it." The room went silent. Marcus stared at Tyler, his mouth open. "I don't understand." "I've been doing some research, Marcus. About you. About your mama. About 48-hour shifts and 3-hour bus rides." Tyler leaned forward. "Tell me something. When my mama was sick, you know what kept me going? The dream that one day, if I made it, I could help other people who were where I had been." Mrs. Johnson reached out and took Tyler's hand, her eyes filled with tears. "God don't make no mistakes," she whispered, "even when we don't understand his plan." The Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom hummed with anticipation. News cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like artificial stars. Marcus stood backstage, tugging at his new suit, a gift from Tyler Perry's personal tailor. "Stop fidgeting," Aunt Ruby whispered, straightening his tie. "You look handsome." "I can't do this," Marcus muttered. "All those cameras." "Yes, you can," his mother said from her wheelchair. She looked stronger today, her head wrapped in a colorful scarf Tyler's stylist had brought her. "God didn't bring you this far to leave you now." Sarah, Tyler's assistant, appeared with a tablet. "2 minutes, everyone. Mr. Perry's arriving now." Through the curtain, Marcus could hear the crowd's murmur turn to excited chatter as Tyler Perry entered the hotel, the same hotel that had fired Marcus just weeks ago. "You remember what to say?" Sarah asked. Marcus nodded. "Speak from the heart. That's what Mr. Perry said." "That's right." Tyler's voice came from behind them. He walked up, adjusting his cufflinks. "Because the heart is where the truth lives." He turned to Mrs. Johnson. "How you feeling today, Mama Rose?" "Blessed," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Just blessed." The hotel manager approached, wringing his hands nervously. "Mr. Perry, we're ready whenever you are." "Good." Tyler looked at Marcus. "You ready to change some lives?" Before Marcus could answer, the curtain parted. The flashbulbs were blinding. Tyler Perry stepped to the podium, his presence commanding immediate silence. "Thank you all for coming. 3 weeks ago, a video went viral. You all saw it. A black doorman telling me to use the service entrance. The internet exploded. People called for boycotts. They called this man names I won't repeat." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know about a son working 48 hours straight to pay for his mother's cancer treatment. They didn't know about the 3-hour bus rides because he'd sold his car to pay medical bills. They didn't know about a man who'd given his Christmas bonus to a homeless family, who'd worked 15 years with a perfect record until exhaustion clouded his judgment for one moment. The room was absolutely silent now. I stand here today, not just to tell that story, but to announce something bigger. The Tyler Perry Foundation is launching a new initiative, the Second Chance Fund. This fund will provide medical assistance to service industry workers facing catastrophic health costs, their own or their family members. Cameras flashed as Tyler continued. And to lead this program, to identify the people who need help the most, I've chosen someone who understands their struggle personally. Marcus Johnson. Marcus stepped forward on shaky legs. The lights were hot, the cameras intimidating. But when he looked at his mother's proud face, he found his strength. "My mama taught me that mistakes don't define you," he said, his voice growing stronger. "It's what you do after them that matters. I made a mistake that night, but through Mr. Perry's grace and understanding, that mistake has become an opportunity to help others who are struggling like I was." His voice cracked slightly. To every person out there working doubles, skipping meals to pay bills, choosing between rent and medicine, I see you, we see you, and help is coming. Mrs. Johnson wheeled forward, tears streaming down her face. The cameras went crazy, capturing the moment Tyler Perry knelt beside her wheelchair. "Child," she said, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "my boy always said you were an angel. Now I know he was right." Later, after the press conference, Marcus stood in the hotel lobby, the same lobby where his world had fallen apart weeks ago. James, the bellhop, approached with a huge grin. "Look at you, Mr. Executive Director," he teased. "Don't forget us little people." Marcus hugged him tight. "Never." Tyler appeared at his side. "Ready for your first day tomorrow?" "We've got a lot of work to do." Marcus looked around the lobby, at his mother chatting with reporters, at Aunt Ruby showing off her new dress, at the doorman holding the entrance with the same pride he once had. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said. "For 15 years I held that door. Thought that was my purpose. But maybe I was just practicing. Practicing? For opening bigger doors. For other people." Tyler smiled. "God don't make no mistakes." "No, sir," Marcus agreed. "He sure don't." That night, back in his apartment, which he'd decided to keep despite Tyler's offer of a fancier place, Marcus sat with his mother. "You proud of me, Mama?" She took his hand, her grip stronger than it had been in weeks. "Baby, I was proud of you when you were holding that door. I was proud of you when you were riding that bus for hours. I was proud of you when you made a mistake and faced it like a man. And I am proud of you now." Marcus looked at the framed photo Tyler had given him, a picture of both their mothers, smiling from heaven. Below it, Tyler had written, "Sometimes our worst moments lead to our greatest purpose." "You know what, Mama?" Marcus said softly. "I think I am finally proud of me too." Outside his window, the Atlanta skyline glittered with possibility. Tomorrow, he would start his new job, helping people who were where he'd been. Tomorrow, he would begin opening those bigger doors. But tonight, he just sat with his mother, holding her hand, grateful for second chances and the mysterious ways God worked to turn mistakes into miracles. As the city lights twinkled outside, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "First meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. We've got 20 families waiting for help already." Mrs. Johnson noticed her son's smile. "What is it, baby?" "Life, Mama. Everything's different now. But somehow, it feels right." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Washington with her famous sweet potato pie. "Saw you on television, sugar. The whole building was watching. We're all so proud." Behind her stood James and several other hotel workers. They filed in, carrying dishes and drinks, turning Marcus's small apartment into an impromptu celebration. "Remember what you told me that night?" James asked, handing Marcus a plate. "About being too old for a corporate job? Look at you now, Mr. Executive Director." Devin, the morning doorman, raised his glass. To Marcus Johnson, from holding doors to opening them. As laughter and conversation filled the apartment, Marcus's mother watched it all with shining eyes. "See what happens when you let people love you," she whispered. Marcus squeezed her hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities. But tonight was for family, both blood and chosen, and for remembering that sometimes what looks like an ending is just God's way of writing a new beginning. To second chances, Marcus said, raising his glass. And to angels in unexpected places. Through his window, the Ritz-Carlton's lights glowed in the distance, no longer a reminder of what he'd lost, but a marker of where his new journey had begun.